Forest rangers, what are your unexplainable and downright creepy stories? One of my best buds from college was a geologist major that ended up becoming a ranger in the southeast US. Haven't spoken in years, as is the case with age, but I remember about 8 to 9 years back he was telling me about an old, married couple that he had recently helped out. He had seen them come to the park several days in a row and found out they were visiting from out west and they had gotten engaged there decades prior. They had been searching for a spot they'd taken pics of where he popped the question, but were having trouble. After looking at the pics and figuring out roughly where they were trying to get to, he escorted them in his vehicle, then hiked with them to where he thought it would be. They found it, and he left them there and went back to his station at the entrance. He said he got a weird feeling once he got back and felt like he needed to wait to see them whenever they left. Well, once it came time to lock up at night, he still hadn't seen them leave, so he reported it, left his assistant to wait at the shack at the entrance, and went back to where he left them. He found both of them lying down spooning along the bank of the river. Neither were alive. He called the cops, went through the 9 yards, and went home. The police were able to disclose to him their identities, but weren't sure anything else initially. Later he learned that the wife was terminally ill with cancer, and they had both committed suicide by ingesting some sort of chemical/pill combination medley. They just chose to do it where they had gotten engaged at. My bud wasn't torn up about it. He was obviously sad about them dying, but said that he thought they hadn't asked for help earlier because they didn't want anyone to think they helped kill them. I have so many of these, but I'll share my favorite. I have been a ranger in the USFS for almost 15 years, but this takes place about 3 years after I joined. We were getting calls about a lone wolf with a collar on hanging around campsites. Weird, since wolves aren't known to be in the area, but when you work in the field long enough you start to realize anything is possible. No calls had mentioned violent behavior from the animal, thank God. I departed from the station around noon to check out the places that it had been sighted. Wandered around for about 3 hours. No further calls during that time until I took a break for water. Sat down, had a snack, drank some water, and was getting ready to go again when the thing was about 20 feet out, trotting near the tree line. It seemed friendly and had the collar, so I whistled to it and he came over to me. Getting a closer look, I could see it wasn't a wolf. It was huge, but it was dark and didn't have the right body structure, though I could see why it'd be confusing from a distance. I radioed in and reported that I had the dog with me, but as soon as I said I'd bring it in, the dog f***ing took off, like he was playing, to see how far he could get me to chase him. Typical dog behavior. I went after it, and I swear it was a game of chase for at least 5 minutes as we steadily ran through the forest. Please don't go running through woods unless you know the area like the back of your hand. The dog finally slowed down near a rock bed/creek area and started pacing around a spot. I drew closer and didn't see anything off at first. Then I noticed it. The overgrowth had almost disguised what appeared to be bones. I called it in immediately and another team was sent to recover the remains. When I went to retrieve the dog, he was just gone. But, honestly, it wasn't a priority at that point. He was friendly enough, and I figured we'd catch up with him later. The bones were identified as a teenage male's, died by a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head. He'd been reported missing in the area long before I became a ranger, and there'd been pretty much no hope of finding him. I spoke to his mom on the phone. She called to thank me personally, and she asked how I'd found her son. I mentioned the black dog, then thought I'd said something wrong, since there was a pause on her side of the line. After I gave a couple details about the dog, she quietly explained that her son, who struggled with making connections, had sunken into a deep depression after the death of his best friend, the very dog that had led me to him. I think I spent the rest of the day stunned. I continue to be in disbelief, in a way, but I know what happened. Not a ranger, but I lived on the outskirts of a national park in a cabin. It was a 4-mile drive from the main road, just to get to the property, and we had no plumbing or power. This property was right next to where the park started. To call it the middle of nowhere is an understatement. My roommate at the time was interning with the park service, but he is a city kid. Every evening at the dead of night I had been hearing noises in the woods, what I thought was someone walking, but then they'd just stop in particularly overgrown areas of the jungle, so your mind starts to doubt itself. Is it a pig? A cat? Is it just the wind? The cabin didn't have a locking door, and the owners didn't want me to install one, so I began sleeping in my car. Now, this is a huge property, and I'd parked my car over an acre away from the cabin, and where I was hearing something, I started hearing those footsteps again. I moved out. My roommate, who thought I was bonkers, stayed and still slept there without a locking door. He got robbed, not once, but twice after I moved out. So he finally put up motion triggered cameras. There was a man with a long rifle who'd hike up to the property, set up in the bushes, and watch us. Not a ranger, but I was out camping with my dog one night along the Mogollon Rim of Arizona. It was dark, and we were sitting around the campfire when we hear something behind a bush close to our camp. Instead of my dog barking at it, he begins to whimper. I didn't think nothing of it, and just tended to the fire. After a couple of minutes we were some more noises from a different bush. This time my dog gets up and goes over to the tent and scratches the door because he wants to go in. I toss a couple of rocks in the direction I heard the noise and nothing happened. I'm spooked now, so I toss a couple of pieces of wood on the fire and climb into my tent with my dog hoping that the light from the fire would keep whatever was out there away. We eventually fall asleep and luckily had no other disturbances during the night. The next morning, I go out behind the bushes, where we had heard the noises, and found mountain lion tracks that were circling around our camp. I'm sure glad I didn't go looking at night when I heard the noises. I was in the Gila wilderness and a convoy of us campers/fishers were making the drive on the dirt road from Mogollon to Snow Lake when we spotted a forest ranger guy pulled over looking in a ditch. Turns out some idiot tried to make a U-turn and didn't realize the loose rock makes it hard to stop. They went over the edge and high centered. We are miles from the nearest official campground and it's early spring and the nighttime gets pretty damn cold. We get a jeep with a winching position and start to pull the guy out of the ditch. Off a hill comes a white dude in a purple velvet sweatsuit. He's got a walking stick, fanny pack and the purple velvet sweatsuit. That's it. He's a blonde dude and pretty skinny. He comes up to us and he tells us he's German and having a great time. We could not get over the purple velvet suit. It was like a real pimp sweatsuit. The ranger is immediately suspicious, wants to know where's he staying and where he came from. It was around 9 o'clock in the morning and the only way he could have gotten where he came from was to hike for hours. The German guy is a goofy f and just points off toward the other mountain when asked where he's staying/going. We all think it's funny, but also question how the guy's getting along with no water and no food. The sun is intense above 5,000 feet, even if it's only 75 degrees. The German guy refuses water or any other help and just crosses the road, goes off into the woods. The ranger told us he can't really keep the guy from doing that, since he seemed okay. He said he'd check a few campsites in that direction later to see if he made it. We get to Snow Lake and commence drinking like fish in order to better catch fish. That evening the ranger pops by to tell us that nobody at any other camp had seen the dude. He radioed around and no other rangers had abandoned camps or missing campers, and they surely hadn't seen a German dude in purple pimp sweatsuit. That ranger rolled off duty the next day and his replacement came by to make sure the other ranger was smoking something we gave him. We assured him it all happened. Never heard another word about the German in the purple pimp sweatsuit, but makes for a good story. Not a ranger, but my uncle was. He always told the story of when he worked in Montana. He was a solid 5 to 10 miles away from town, so pretty much balls deep in the woods. He recalled pulling his ATV on top of a semi-big hill that overlooked a valley. In between all the trees there was this clearing he could see through his binoculars. Through them he saw an older lady, 60+ish, in black surrounded by 6 to 8 wolves. Now, he is a lengthy distance from the woman, but he starts yelling and honking and all that and takes off down the hill as fast as he could. But when he reached the clearing there was no one there. No wolves, no woman, only a silver ring with a black stone in the middle. He still has it to this day. This is gonna get buried as I'm late to the party, but I worked for a few months as a park ranger with the Florida Forest Service at my local state forest. The creepiest thing I saw was a poor young man who hung himself on my second week on the job. The unexplainable, though, are obviously not as cut and dry. We'd have children's clothes neatly folded and left on the trails, pairs of shoes in the middle of our dense burn blocks, and just a general sense of eeriness. My first few weeks on the job I was easily spooked, but after I got into my groove of spending hours alone in the woods, it took a lot to shake me. When the forest goes silent, pack up and move along. I'm a ranger, non-peace officer, and work at a pretty remote desert park. This happened before I got there, but the other rangers I work with were there. They went to do a patrol during summer, our off season, at one of our seldom used campgrounds. On a patrol, our maintenance ranger found a burnt out car in one of the sites. The desert is a weird place, so he just calls the sheriff and waits. Sheriff arrives and it turns out there's a body in the driver's seat, with no arms and no legs, just a torso and head, burnt. Sheriff's just marked it as a suicide and removed the vehicle. We are close to Mexico and get a lot of illegal drug traffic, so I guess they don't even bother trying to solve those. Super sketchy. My cousin is a park ranger and told me this story. There was this woman that had gone missing in the forest. No biggie, it's a big place. He'll just drive around till he finds her. 4 hours later they still didn't find her. When he heard a blood-curdling scream, this guy had found the missing woman with her throat slit so deep my cousin wasn't sure what she had was even classified as a throat. He restrained the guy that found her and called the police. Sadly, however, there's nothing he or I could find about the subject, and my cousin didn't follow up on it after they arrested the guy, so for all I know he just found her and had nothing to do with it. Alright, obligatory not a ranger, but here goes. I was in the forest camping out under the lovely forests of Jersey. We set up camp and we're all chatting in our tents and left the fire up so we can tell some great scary stories. All was going well until we heard a rustling in a bush, textbook scary story stuff. We all think it's one of our friends who hasn't come back from the potty break, but just as the bush was rustling we see the outline of a person circling our tent. We call out for our friend, but random person does not answer, and at this point he stops in place. We all start getting freaked out as the person we see from outside could not possibly be our friend due to the height difference. One of the members of the group lies saying that we are armed and kill him. A good minute goes by before we all hear what I can describe as the most shrill scream I have ever heard, and you just up and leaves. Creepy part about this is that our friend who was out to the restroom says he heard said scream, but saw no one around the camping area or even footprints of where the man should have been. We were also pretty deep into the woods as well, so it's not as if anyone who was just passing by cold found us, at least not easily. My grandpa had a hunting buddy in the 70s who was basically a hermit in the woods of the Pacific Northwest. He was staying with him in his cabin deep in the Cascade Mountains during a hunting trip. No running water, no electricity, miles away from the nearest town or paved road. His cabin was built on stilts and on an incline. It had a 10-foot balcony from the base of the bottom of the stilts with no stairs or ladder to climb up on. My grandpa claims that he knew this man for a long time and said that he didn't have the personality to lie. I've also known my grandpa to never be one for boast. One night, during the trip, they were relaxing at the cabin after a hunt and his buddy tells him that Sasquatch is in the area and to be careful going out at night. Thinking he was pulling his leg, my grandpa chuckled and didn't think much about it. His friend then put on a very serious face and grabbed a few pieces of fruit, bread, and jerky and placed them in a bowl. He took the bowl out onto the balcony and set it on the edge and said it'll be empty in the morning, and then went to bed. It was an open floor single room cabin, about 300 square feet. My grandpa had a cot set up near the balcony window and was woken up in the middle of the night by rustling outside. He peeked through the window and saw the bowl empty, and to this day still claims he saw 4 fingers resting on the edge of the balcony just before letting go. He never went hunting in that area again. I've got a deep woods story that's been shared in my family for quite a few years. My great uncle was a deep woods kinda guy. In a practice I find a little weird. He would rarely use a tent, just set up a sleeping bag right on the ground. Since we are from Maine, there aren't too many large predators that really mess with people. There are black bears, but they usually hide from people, so I guess he just didn't feel worried. So, he's out sleeping in the woods when he feels tiny hands patting his face. Wakes up, opens his eyes to see a raccoon standing over him, just feeling his face. So what does my great uncle do? He just goes back to sleep. Not being a forest ranger, when I was about 11, I was walking home, and an old guy who was pushing a stroller out of the blue put his hand over my eyes for about a second as he was passing by. I have no idea why I still remember this.
Just wanted to say a big thank you for watching, guys. I really appreciate your support. If you haven't already, please smash that subscribe button. If you want to see more from us, click on the screen right now to watch our next video. See you guys soon.